They say a man can hide his words but never his patterns. Words are tools, shaped and polished to create impressions. But patterns are unfiltered. Patterns reveal the truth of how the heart moves beneath the surface. Love does not speak in promises, it speaks in repetition. When a man returns to the same gesture, the same response, the same presence around a particular woman, it is no longer coincidence. It is confession without language. Repetition is not an accident in matters of love. It is instinct acting before thought. A man may not understand why he replies faster to one person than another, why his attention sharpens around her presence, why he remembers the smallest details she never intended to be significant. But his unconscious knows before he does. The unconscious is older than logic. It moves with an authority that the mind cannot restrain. It recognizes connection before the voice can name it. Most men do not fall in love through sudden intensity. They fall through patterns, through the things they do without realizing. The glance that lingers 1 second too long, the message typed and erased and typed again, the quiet shift in tone when speaking to her compared to anyone else. These are not choices. They are responses to a pull that has already begun. At first, he will try to deny the meaning behind these repetitions. He may tell himself he is only being kind, polite, or friendly. He may insist that nothing has changed. But the pattern betrays him. Because when a man does something, more than once for a particular woman, when he repeats interest, without obligation, that repetition is the soul showing its handwriting. The heart writes in patterns long before the mouth writes in words. Human attraction is layered. The conscious mind sees her face, her movements, her voice, but the unconscious sees something deeper. It sees how she makes him feel. It reads her presence not as appearance, but as resonance. Something in her awakens something in him, memory, longing, recognition. This recognition is what repeats itself. He returns not just to her, but to the way he feels in her presence. In the earliest stages of love, the signs are small, but persistent. A man finds himself thinking of her without reason. He hears her voice in his memory even when silence is around him. He recalls her laughter in moments of stillness. These are not deliberate thoughts. They arise like echoes, unbidden but undeniable. He is beginning to feel her imprint forming inside him. Repetition is the psyche reaching toward what it desires. It is instinct trying to move toward emotional fulfillment. When he responds to her messages quickly, it is because his emotional world prioritizes her presence. When he looks at her with quiet concentration, it is because his mind wants to memorize her. When he creates subtle opportunities to be near her, he is following a pull he cannot articulate. A man does not repeat actions for a woman unless she has touched a place within him deeper than surface desire. Attraction can be fleeting, but repetition requires emotional significance. He may not be aware of the process happening within him. He may believe he is in control. But the truth is that the heart moves first and the mind rationalizes later. The repetition is not planned, it is felt. This is why a man may become restless when he does not speak to her. Why silence from her feels heavier than silence from anyone else. It is not because he has decided she is important. It is because his emotional world has already placed her at the center, quietly and without permission. He may try to ignore this. He may try to distract himself. But emotional repetition has already taken root. People often speak of love as something loud and dramatic. But real love begins quietly. It begins in the spaces between words, in the unspoken responses, in the moments where the mind resists but the soul returns. Love whispers before it ever declares itself. And its first language is pattern. What makes these patterns powerful is that they are involuntary. A man cannot force himself to remember a woman in this way. He cannot pretend to be moved, but he also cannot force himself to stop. The emotional pull is stronger than logic. The pattern reveals the truth he is not ready to speak. It reveals what his heart has already chosen. There is a moment, often subtle, when a man realizes he is repeating himself around her. When he notices he has remembered something she said without effort. When he finds himself hoping to cross paths with her again. When he realizes that her voice has become a familiar rhythm in his thoughts. This is the moment when his unconscious truth begins to rise toward awareness. He may try to resist. He may try to convince himself he is not attached. He may tell himself that he can walk away if he chooses. But emotional repetition does not allow escape. Every attempt to step back only reveals how far he has already gone. The heart does not ask permission to feel. It simply feels. The repetition of thought, of attention, of presence is the beginning of emotional imprinting. She is no longer just a person in his life. She has become an internal presence, a quiet companion in his inner world. Her absence now carries weight. Her presence now brings clarity. He is beginning to love, but he does not yet say it, because the heart speaks slowly, and pride does not surrender easily. Yet the pattern continues, and that is how love begins. There exists within every man a quiet war between the part of him that wants to feel and the part of him that fears being seen. As his patterns form, as he finds himself returning again and again, his ego begins to notice. The ego is built on control, on certainty, on the belief that emotional vulnerability is a kind of risk. It tells him to remain composed, to give nothing away, to stay untouched. It says, do not surrender what you cannot get back. But emotion does not speak the language of caution. It moves with its own logic, a deeper rhythm that does not bow to pride. When a man begins to love, even quietly, even unconsciously, the emotional pull he feels toward her challenges, the identity he has built to protect himself. This is where the conflict begins, not with her, but within him. His ego wants predictability. Love introduces unpredictability. His ego wants strength defined by distance. Love demands strength defined by openness. His ego wants to feel in control. Love makes him realize that control is already slipping from his hands, and yet he does not leave. He returns, not because he has chosen to, but because something within him has already chosen her. This return is not dramatic. It is silent. He thinks of her when he wakes. His thoughts drift toward her in the middle of the day. He notices her absence before he notices the presence of anyone else. These experiences do not ask for permission. They simply happen. They show him the truth he has been avoiding. He may attempt to reason with himself. He may say it is not love, only fascination. He may tell himself she is simply different. He may insist that he is not attached, that he can detach at any moment. But the repetition exposes the truth that the mind refuses to accept. Emotion has surpassed logic. During this stage, he may pull away, not because he does not care, but because he cares too much. The pull away is instinctive, a defense. He senses how deeply she is affecting him, and that realization is frightening. Because love is not just desire. It is surrender, and surrender requires trust. If he has known heartbreak, the fear is greater. Emotional memory shapes every love that follows. The mind remembers pain more vividly than joy, so the ego stands guard. It says, do not fall, do not repeat the wound. And so he withdraws, thinking that distance will protect him. But distance becomes a teacher. Because even in distance, the repetition remains. He still thinks of her. He still feels the instinct to reach out. He still notices her presence in his absence. Distance reveals that his attachment is not conditional on contact. It is internal. And that is when he realizes that he is no longer simply attracted. He is connected. The connection does not ask for permission. It simply exists. This realization shifts something inside him. The ego, once rigid and firm, begins to soften. It does not disappear. Pride never leaves completely, but it becomes quieter. It realizes that love does not demand humiliation. It demands honesty, and honesty is something he cannot escape, because it now lives inside him. He begins to see her differently, not as someone he could choose or replace, but as someone who reflects something sacred within him. Her presence becomes more than physical attraction. She embodies a silent emotional truth he has longed for without knowing he longed. This is where the deeper attraction forms, the attraction of recognition. He recognizes something in her that feels familiar, even if he has never known it before. It is not familiarity of memory, it is familiarity of soul, a sense that she touches the part of him that lives beneath identity. beneath pride, beneath language. What draws him is not only who she is, but who he becomes in her presence. Around her, he feels more alive, more open, more real. There is a quiet understanding between his emotional self and the part of him that has always longed to be understood. It is not that she gives him something he lacked. It is that she awakens something he had forgotten. And because of this, he continues to return, even when he tries not to, even when it makes no sense, even when the world around him advises caution. The repetition is now no longer just behavior. It is longing. He begins to notice how deeply he listens when she speaks, not because he tries to, but because her voice draws his attention without effort. He remembers her words not as facts, but as impressions. The way she says things, the tone of her laugh, the quiet spaces between her sentences. He is not simply hearing her, he is experiencing her. This level of attention is not casual. It is intimate. A man listens like this only when something within him is being moved. And still he says nothing. Not because he does not feel the depth of his emotion, but because he is still learning how to hold it. Love is large, and at first it feels like something that must be contained. He does not yet know how to speak it, because speaking it would mean acknowledging how real it is. So the repetition continues, the silent glances, the small acts of care, the consistent return. This is the language of love before speech, the heart preparing its voice. But soon, the patterns will reveal something deeper, something more ancient than desire, the part of him that recognizes her not just as someone he wants, but as someone who reflects who he truly is. As his attention deepens, something else begins to unfold within him, an inner recognition, a sense that she is not simply a person he desires, but a reflection of something already living inside him. Psychologists describe this as projection, but the word is too small for the experience. It is not imagination. It is resonance. He does not invent qualities in her. He sees something in her that mirrors his own hidden emotional truth. Within every man exists an inner image of the feminine, not a memory of a specific woman, but a quiet, archetypal presence formed from what he has witnessed, longed for, lost, or yearned to become. It is the emotional part of him that dreams, feels, and knows without analytical proof. For most of his life, this inner feminine remains unseen, unspoken, and unacknowledged, yet it lives within him as the source of his depth. When he encounters a woman who reflects this inner image, whether through her softness, her presence, her intuition, her silence, or her strength, his soul recognizes her before his mind understands what is happening. This recognition is not loud. It is quiet and immediate, a moment where time seems to soften, space becomes still, and something familiar stirs within him. He does not think, I have found her. He simply feels, I know her. This knowing is not logical. It does not depend on shared history or conversation. It is the sense that she carries something he has been searching for. Even if he did not know he was searching, she awakens the part of him that has been dormant, the part of him that wants to feel openly, deeply, without restraint. This is why love feels spiritual before it feels emotional. It is the merging of inner and outer worlds. She becomes the mirror in which his unspoken self comes forward, his vulnerability, his tenderness, his longing for closeness. He does not fall in love with her instead of himself. He falls in love with the version of himself he becomes in her presence. This is also why her absence cuts more deeply than the absence of others. She does not disappear with distance. She lives inside him. His longing for her is not a longing for possession. It is a longing for wholeness. At first, he may idealize her. He may see her not only as she is, but as a symbol of what his heart believes love should feel like. He projects depth where perhaps she has not yet revealed it, softness where she has not yet shown it, purity where she is simply human. But this is not naive fantasy. It is the psyche reaching toward completion. It is the soul trying to unite what has been divided. With time, he will begin to see her more clearly, not as a perfect embodiment of his inner image, but as a real human being with her own fears, strengths, shadows, and history. If his love is shallow, this realization will break the spell, and his interest will fade. But if his love is real, this is where it deepens. Because real love begins not when he sees his ideal in her, but when he sees her as she truly is and still returns. This is the moment love matures from projection into connection. It is no longer about what she symbolizes, but who she is. He begins to understand that the qualities he admired in her, warmth, intuition, softness, courage, depth, are not things she possesses instead of him. They are qualities she awakens in him. She becomes not a replacement for what he lacks, but a guide toward the parts of himself he has not yet embraced. He does not want to own her. He wants to meet himself through her. This is the difference between desire and love. Desire says, I want you because you fulfill something in me. Love says, I want you because through you I discover myself. Her presence shifts his emotional landscape. His inner life becomes more vivid, richer, more complex. He begins to feel more intensely, not only toward her, but toward life itself. Colors seem deeper. Silence feels meaningful. Memories feel textured. He becomes more aware of what he feels, why he feels it, and what those feelings reveal about his interior world. This awakening does not always feel peaceful. Love introduces uncertainty. When something or someone touches the deepest part of him, he cannot remain untouched. He begins to question the parts of himself he once believed were unchangeable. His identity, once formed through logic and control, begins to soften. He realizes that love is not a threat to his strength, it is evidence of his depth. Yet this realization also brings vulnerability. And vulnerability requires courage. He must now decide whether to allow himself to be changed, whether to let the connection unfold, whether to surrender the safety of emotional distance for the truth of emotional intimacy. This is where many men hesitate, not because they do not love, but because love requires them to step into themselves fully. And stepping into oneself is one of the most terrifying acts of the human experience. But something remarkable happens when love is real. The risk of losing her becomes greater than the fear of being seen. That is when he begins to open, not with grand confessions or dramatic declarations, but with presence. He shows up. He listens. He allows silence. He shares without forcing. He lets his guard lower quietly, steadily, organically. He returns not to her as an idea, but to her as a person. In that return, the connection ceases to be imagined. It becomes real, and the man who once hid behind patterns now finds himself living inside them, not because he has surrendered control, but because he has found something worth surrendering to. As his inner world shifts, another transformation begins, one that is subtle at first, but unmistakable. He starts to move from recognition into surrender, not the surrender of defeat or weakness, but the surrender of openness, the surrender that allows love to enter fully. There is a moment every man faces when he realizes that the feelings he holds are not passing. They do not fade with distraction. They do not dissolve with silence. They remain steady, patient, undeniable. The woman has become part of his emotional gravity. His thoughts orbit her without effort. His desires align toward her without command. What once felt like coincidence now feels like inevitability. But the greatest obstacle he faces is not love itself, it is himself. He has learned through life that vulnerability is dangerous, that to need someone is to risk losing them, that to care deeply is to expose the most fragile parts of himself. He remembers the moments when trust was met with disappointment, when affection was met with abandonment, when honesty was met with regret. These memories do not simply disappear. They form the armor he wears. Love asks him to loosen that armor, to let someone see him without it. This is not easy. It is the hardest thing he will ever do. So he hesitates. He moves closer, then steps back. He opens slightly, then withdraws, not because he has changed his mind, but because he is learning how to hold the magnitude of what he feels. He is learning how to allow love to touch him without letting fear guide him. The woman may misunderstand this distance. She may think his retreat means he does not care, but in truth, it means he cares deeply enough to be afraid. Love has reached the part of him that cannot pretend, and fear rises where love is real. The ego tries to tighten its grip. It says, stay in control, do not give yourself away. But the heart whispers something quieter, more profound. Let yourself be moved. He begins to understand that control is not strength. Control is a shield that keeps harm out, but also keeps love out. If he wishes to love fully, he must be willing to feel fully. He must be willing to stand in the open. This realization is not sudden. It unfolds in moments. The moment he realizes her voice softens him. The moment her sadness affects him more than his own. The moment her presence brings peace instead of demand. The moment he notices he is becoming more himself, not less, when he is with her. These moments become proof. Love is not asking him to lose himself. Love is asking him to return to himself. The surrender that once felt like danger now begins to feel like truth. A truth that does not frighten him but steadies him. He starts to allow the tenderness he once hid. He lets her see his uncertainty, his questions, his hopes. He shows her the part of him that is quiet, the part of him that is strong, and the part of him that is wounded. Not all at once but gradually, like opening a window before a sunrise. He begins to speak more openly, not through speeches or declarations but through presence, through consistency, through the way he stays instead of leaves, through the way he gives without calculation, through the way he lets his guard lower, piece by piece. He discovers that love does not require perfection. It requires sincerity. The strongest love does not come from the absence of fear, but from the courage to continue despite it. As he surrenders, he begins to experience a different kind of strength, a strength that does not depend on distance or control, a strength that comes from emotional clarity, a strength that allows him to feel deeply without collapsing under the weight of those feelings. He realizes that love is not something he falls into. It is something he steps into, with awareness, with intention, with heart. It is a choice, but not the kind he makes once. It is a choice he makes again and again. In every moment he returns, every moment he stays open, every moment he chooses truth over fear. The woman becomes not a possession but a presence that anchors him, a presence that exhales warmth into the spaces within him that once felt cold. Her existence becomes a quiet reassurance that he is not alone in his experience of the world, that there is someone who sees him. Not the image he shows, but the depth he carries. And he begins to see her too, not as an ideal, not as a symbol, but as a person whose heart has its own story. He begins to understand her fears, her silences, her softness, her strength. When he loves her truly, he does not ask her to be perfect. He loves the way she is human. He loves the way she feels. He loves the way she reveals herself, even in small gestures. This mutual recognition becomes the binding element. Not possession, not intensity, not urgency, presence. Two souls seeing one another clearly. And it is in this clarity that love transforms from emotion into devotion. Not a devotion that seeks to own or control, but one that seeks to understand, to protect, to nourish, to grow. The man who once resisted his feelings now stands inside them fully. He no longer runs from the depth of his love. He allows it to guide him. He allows it to soften him. He allows it to change him. And he realizes that surrender was not the loss he feared. It was the freedom he was always seeking. There comes a point where love no longer hides behind patterns or hesitation. A point where the quiet repetitions that once acted as subtle confessions begin to take shape as something steady, grounded and undeniable. He no longer returns because he is pulled by instinct alone. He returns because he recognizes, fully and consciously, that something in her has touched the deepest part of him. A part he cannot and does not want to abandon. This is where emotional imprinting reveals its full depth. When a man has loved in a way that reaches beyond desire, when the connection touches his inner world, his identity, his memory of belonging, something within him changes. It is not simply that he cares for her. It is that she becomes woven into the way he experiences himself. She becomes part of the emotional language through which he interprets life. He could meet others. He could speak with others. He could move through the world with ease. Yet, none of it feels the same. None of it reaches him the way she does. The emotional imprint she leaves behind does not fade with time or distance. It becomes the quiet presence that stays with him even when he believes he has moved on. Her voice becomes memory. Her laughter becomes warmth. Her presence becomes a kind of internal home. The mind is capable of forgetting facts and moments with remarkable efficiency. But the heart does not forget how it felt to be seen. And it is precisely this feeling, the feeling of being seen, understood, mirrored, that creates the imprint that lingers. This is why he returns in thought even when he does not return in action. Why silence does not dissolve the bond. Why distance does not break what has rooted itself in the unconscious. He has associated her with a part of himself he did not know how to access alone. In loving her, he came closer to himself, and the soul does not forget the place where it found itself. Even if life shifts, even if circumstances complicate, even if each takes a different path for a time, she remains a living presence within his emotional memory, not as an obsession, not as longing for possession, but as a quiet truth. She was real, not loud, not forced, not performed. Real in the way that leaves marks. Love like this does not fade, it transforms. He begins to understand that the connection was not just about how he felt toward her, but about what the experience awakened within him. He recognizes that she did not simply enter his life, she entered the depth of him, the part of him that feels without armor. This kind of love does not disappear when unspoken. It matures in silence. It deepens in the places where words never reached. It becomes a part of who he is. And yet, this imprinting is not meant to trap him. It is not a chain or a burden. It is a mirror of what he is capable of, what he has touched, what he can feel, what he can give. It becomes the quiet reminder that he is not numb, not cold, not unreachable. He is alive and capable of deep connection. The imprint becomes his proof. With time, he sees love not as something that threatens his independence, but as something that completes his humanity. He no longer fears vulnerability the way he once did, because he has learned that vulnerability is not the collapse of strength. It is the revelation of truth, and truth is the only thing love ever asks for. He does not need to speak in dramatic declarations. He does not need to prove anything. His presence, his consistency, his attention, his return, these become the real confessions. Love, when it is real, does not demand performance. It expresses itself through the way he remembers without effort, the way he listens without strategy, the way he stays even when fear rises, the way he chooses her without announcing it. For him, the repetition was never accidental. It was the soul recognizing the soul. Love began as instinct, became recognition, grew through resistance, softened into surrender, and matured into devotion. Not devotion to an idea, but to her, to the truth she awakened, to the depth he found in himself through loving her. And now he understands what his patterns have been saying all along, that every return was a confession, that every glance was acknowledgement, that every moment of hesitation was simply fear learning to release its grip. He understands now that love is not the loud chaos the world portrays, nor the fragile ideal he once imagined. Love is steady. Love is depth. Love is presence. Love is the echo that continues long after the moment has passed. Love is the imprint that shapes him quietly from within. And when he looks at her now, whether she stands before him, or lives in memory, or walks beside him into the next chapter of his life, he knows the truth without needing to speak it. He did not just love her, he was transformed by loving her. For love in its truest form is not the act of holding another person. It is the becoming of oneself in the presence of another soul. And every repetition was the heart revealing, "This is where I found myself." He begins to understand that the connection was not just about how he felt toward her, but about what the experience awakened within him. He recognizes that she did not simply enter his life, she entered the depth of him, the part of him that feels without armor. This kind of love does not disappear when unspoken. It matures in silence. It deepens in the places where words never reached. It becomes a part of who he is. And yet, this imprinting is not meant to trap him. It is not a chain or a burden. It is a mirror of what he is capable of, what he has touched, what he can feel, what he can give. It becomes the quiet reminder that he is not numb, not cold, not unreachable. He is alive and capable of deep connection. The imprint becomes his proof. With time, he sees love not as something that threatens his independence, but as something that completes his humanity. He no longer fears vulnerability the way he once did, because he has learned that vulnerability is not the collapse of strength. It is the revelation of truth, and truth is the only thing love ever asks for. He does not need to speak in dramatic declarations. He does not need to prove anything. His presence, his consistency, his attention, his return, these become the real confessions. Love, when it is real, does not demand performance. It expresses itself through the way he remembers without effort, the way he listens without strategy, the way he stays even when fear rises, the way he chooses her without announcing it. For him, the repetition was never accidental. It was the soul recognizing the soul. Love began as instinct, became recognition, grew through resistance, softened into surrender, and matured into devotion. Not devotion to an idea, but to her, to the truth she awakened, to the depth he found in himself through loving her. And now he understands what his patterns have been saying all along, that every return was a confession, that every glance was acknowledgement, that every moment of hesitation was simply fear learning to release its grip. He understands now that love is not the loud chaos the world portrays, nor the fragile ideal he once imagined. Love is steady. Love is depth. Love is presence. Love is the echo that continues long after the moment has passed. Love is the imprint that shapes him quietly from within. And when he looks at her now, whether she stands before him, or lives in memory, or walks beside him into the next chapter of his life, he knows the truth without needing to speak it. He did not just love her, he was transformed by loving her. For love in its truest form is not the act of holding another person. It is the becoming of oneself in the presence of another soul. And every repetition was the heart revealing, "This is where I found myself.